Hello and welcome. My name is Matthew, and today we're going to be looking at a new scientific paper that was released the 1st of January of this year. And the reason we're looking at this paper is because we're trying to find an answer to the question of how deadly was COVID-19 really? Now, the information we're going to be looking at is before vaccines were available. So let's just get straight into it. The title of the paper is the Age-Stratified Infection Fatality Rate of COVID-19 in the Non-Elderly Population. Now, the infection fatality rate is what we are looking for when we want to assess how deadly COVID-19 or how deadly any disease is. Now, the non-elderly population, this is looking at people who are under 70 years old, which constitutes some 94% of the global population. When we want to go to assess a scientific paper, one of the first things we might do is look at who the authors of this paper were. Now, there's quite a recognizable name here amongst them, Professor John Ioannidis. Now, let's give a bit of background information on who he is. He is a professor of medicine at Stanford University. And furthermore, if we want to get a better understanding of who a author is, a medical researcher, we can look at things like the H-index. So Professor Ioannidis has a H-index of 238. Now, if we go to our good friend Google, we can figure out what the H-index means. So this is a metric that is used to measure the productivity and citation impact of an individual scientist or scholar. And to give a bit of a reference point, after 20 years of research, a H-index of 20 would be seen as good, 40 would be seen as outstanding, and a scientist who has a H-index of 60 would be truly exceptional. Once again, Professor John Ioannidis' H-index is 238. So that might be a bit of context of why some people consider him the Stephen Hawking of medical research. Let's just get into the paper, and I'm going to cut straight to the chase. And we can see under the highlights section here, at a global level, the pre-vaccination infection fatality rate may have been as low as 0.07% for people who are under 70 years old. So another way to look at that statistic is if you caught COVID-19, what were your chances of survival? For those under 70, it was greater than 99.9%. And so if you're still reeling from that statistic a little bit, let's get some more information from this paper that looked at 40 eligible national seroprevalence studies. Now, a seroprevalence study is a study that looks at how many people within the population have antibodies to a disease. So this is a more accurate statistic to use than the case fatality rate. Part of the reason why is, say, somebody was infected with COVID-19, but they didn't go get a test, well then that wouldn't show up in the case fatality rate. And we know that many people that did have COVID-19 didn't go get tested whenever they had it. A lot of people didn't have many symptoms as well, so that'd be further reason. And I think some people might have been put off by the social repercussions of going into a place and then being forced to isolate against their will. Now, just to keep going, they looked at these studies covering 38 different countries. So I don't think we could say that there's any bias that, we're just looking at one or two places. Maybe there's issues with how they recorded it. Once you start looking at more than a couple dozen countries, I think it's pretty fair to say that this might be a reasonable estimate. And once again, this paper came out on the 1st of January of this year, meaning that this is the most up-to-date scientific research we have in this regards. And just to clarify again, this is the pre-vaccination seroprevalence data. So this is when the alpha variant was around. We know now that Omicron is the main one, and it's much more mild than the initial alpha variant. The infection fatality rate, again, this death rate, is split into different age groups, because we know that the infection fatality rate increases about 4 times for every 10 years. So how severe COVID is depends greatly upon the age of the individual. The younger you are, the less you have to worry about COVID-19. Just to look at this data for people who are in my age bracket, i.e. those who were under 30 years old, the median infection fatality rate was 0.002%. So for people who were under 30 years old, their chance of survival if they caught COVID-19, again, for the first time before vaccines were out, was greater than 99.99%. So That was the main statistic I wanted to get across to people today. It's important for us to understand when a new disease comes along, how deadly that disease is, and then we can use that as our worst case scenario and then work backwards from that in order to figure out what our best strategy or our best plan is for dealing with it. Now that we know that the infection fatality rate for COVID-19 was so extraordinarily low and that the Omicron version is even more mild than that, I think it puts what happened over the last couple of years from, say, forcibly vaccinating populations to locking people down into their homes, even though they didn't have symptoms and were healthy, into a bit of a different perspective. So thanks very much for stopping by. I'll be back again soon with another paper expanding upon this topic. Thank you.